Good morning. Sorry, we're a bit late. The earlier sessions went on, so I expect we probably have some people coming in during the session after they get their coffee. So welcome to the session called Water from Mountains to Coast, Promoting Recovery in Freshwater and Water-Dependent Ecosystems, just to make sure you are actually in the right place. I wouldn't like you having to leave all of a sudden. My name is Colin Byrne. I'm an advisor with the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. We have responsibility for water policy. We were asked to organise a session on water and what's happening in the world of water with a view to feeding into the biodiversity plan. And as you'll hopefully see from the presentations, there's huge overlap here. I mean, increased biodiversity is good for water quality, good water quality is good for biodiversity. They're very integrally intertwined. We have a number of speakers here who give some short presentations just to get some context and get our heads in the space. What you're going to be hearing are actions, a cross-section of actions which are taking place under the umbrella of river basin planning, which is a requirement of the Water Framework Directive. We've just come out of a consultation phase on the draft plan at the end of March, and we expect to publish that plan by the end of this year. You'll notice there's a couple of key principles, and I'm sure some of you have been probably involved in the consultations on it and indeed involved in your day-to-day functions, etc. But you'll see an increasing emphasis on measures which deliver multiple benefits in terms of water quality, biodiversity, climate. And we've been at pains to try and identify measures that deliver multiple benefits in those areas. You'll see a strong emphasis on nature-based solutions as well. Again, you can see the overlap. And we're focusing on the right measure in the right place, and that's becoming kind of common day language, if you like. And it really is about trying to be very targeted based on technical scientific information. Where do you actually need the measures to be put so that you can then invest and locate your measures where they will actually make a difference. And very importantly, you'll see, and particularly with the CAP strategic plan, which is going through finalisation, there's now a major shift towards delivering outcomes, not just paying farmers for undertaking activities, but actually for delivering environmental outcomes. And that's really going to, if you like, shape the way we move forward. So as I said, I think we've kind of a fairly eclectic mix of presentations here today. We will have Mags Keegan, who's with the Local Authorities Water Programme, who's going to talk about the interaction between biodiversity and water, and particularly then focus on community initiatives which are underway. Then we'll have Adrian Conway, who will talk about nature-based solutions in the urban setting, which I think is really interesting and huge potential there. And then we go all the way up to Donegal, and Trish Murphy, who's with the Inishowen Rivers Trust, will bring us through some actions that are being taken by the trust up there. So now you have community acting in that space and putting in nature-based solutions and what community initiatives can bring to biodiversity and indeed water quality. We then have Ciara O'Leary from Inland Fisheries of Ireland, who's going to explain the problems that barriers on rivers pose. We were talking about everything from Ard na Crusha, Partine, all the way down to bridge aprons, very small scale. And they can have very significant negative impact on biodiversity. And Ciara will bring us through that and what's being done and what the plan is over the next couple of years. And then finally, we'll have Cormac McConigley, who's with the Waters of Life project, and he's going to look at our Premier League water bodies, if you like. These are the high status water bodies which are close to pristine. And there's a number of initiatives which are underway to address deterioration and protection of these waters, which are very, very sensitive. And he'll bring some context there as to what's happening in that space at the moment. So just the sequence of events here, we'll have some presentations here. I'd invite anybody online, if you have any questions, put it in the chat, and my colleague Anne Goggin will sift through those, and when we get to the discussion session, which we're allowing half an hour at the end to go through questions and answers, etc., and just a general discussion about what the water side of the world can do to contribute to biodiversity. We'll get into that discussion. And again, if you can think of questions or points that you want to make, and say this is a kind of interactive type of setup here. We certainly want to hear from you. As I said, what comes out of this discussion will go forward to our colleagues in the Heritage Division to feed into the plan for biodiversity. So without further ado, I'll ask Max Keegan to come up here. She's the regional coordinator with the Midlands and East region of what's called the Local Authorities Water Programme, and she'll fill you in exactly what that is. It's a shared service coordinating efforts to protect and restore water quality right across Ireland's catchments. Mags has an MSc in hydrogeology and previously worked as catchment manager and also with the Environmental Protection Agency in areas such as drinking water, wastewater enforcement, risk assessment, septic tanks, and the EPA research program. So she brings a very broad perspective and experience to the job. So Mags, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Colin. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the invitation to speak to you today. I'm going to introduce you to some of the links between water and biodiversity, but as has been said to me already today, is that many who work in the biodiversity area see water as an integral part of it. It's a habitat in itself, but I just want to draw out some of those linkages and give some examples of community action. Sorry now. So we know we have lots of water, but actually very little of it is on land, and even a smaller amount of that is actually fresh water. And you can see that our rivers make up a very, very small percentage of that, 0.007%, and it is therefore essential that we protect and improve it. So as you can see from the previous slide, freshwater only covers 1% of the Earth's surface. However, it's home to approximately 10% of our species, 1/3 of the vertebrates, and more than half are fish species. So as I said, a very small percentage of water is also very important for our biodiversity. And the Living Planet report in 2020 identified that global wetland decline is 3 times faster than that of forests, and freshwater vertebrates have declined by 84% since the 1970s. And more worryingly, a number of freshwater species are at threat of extinction. So what is happening about this? We're here today and yesterday to discuss the 4th National Biodiversity Action Plan, but now I want to maybe introduce you to the Water Framework Directive, which is what we use on the water side of things. The Water Framework Directive is an overarching directive that came into being in 2000 and came into Irish regulations in 2003. And it links together a number of requirements from different directives, such as the Urban Wastewater Directive, the Nitrates Directive, but also in terms of biodiversity, the Birds and Habitats Directives. And the aims of the Water Framework Directive are to prevent deterioration and enhance the status of our aquatic ecosystems, as well as groundwater, to promote sustainable water use, to reduce pollution, to contribute to the mitigation of floods and droughts, and to encourage active involvement of all interested parties. So looking at the link between the Habitats, the Birds Directives, and the Water Framework Directive, and these all aim at ensuring healthy aquatic ecosystems, while at the same time ensuring a balance between water and nature protection and the sustainable use of our water resources. There are many synergies, as the implementation of measures under the Water Framework Directive will generally benefit the objectives of the nature directives. And specifically, in protected areas in the Water Framework Directive, link directly to those identified in the Habitats and Birds Directive where they are associated with water. And that includes the water-dependent Natura 2000 sites. And where we have those sites, the objectives of both the Habitats and Birds Directive, as well as the Water Framework Directive, apply. And where you have a water body that has objectives under both the Nature Directives and the Water Framework Directive, then the most stringent applies. So we're all aware of the use of butterflies and bees as bioindicators for the health of terrestrial ecosystems. And we're aware of the National Biodiversity Action Plan and the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. But for water, we have the Water Framework Directives, River Basin Management Plan. And as Colin said, it was out for public consultation earlier the year, and we're expecting that we will have a plan later this year. The Water Framework Directive measures ecological status on a 5-point scale, from high to good and down to bad. And ecological status is based on many elements that altogether show the overall health of the river. So, for example, the ecology recorded in river habitats, the physical chemical condition of the river, which includes nutrient concentrations, and the fish status. The physical condition of the riverbed and bank has a particular impact on our high status waters. And high status or blue dot waters are our best water quality waters, and they have the highest ecological quality and often the greater diversity of sensitive species to pollution. The bioindicators for aquatic biodiversity and ecosystem health are invertebrates, macrophytes, macroalgae, and fish. And a decline in water quality is an expression of a decline in aquatic biodiversity. Bioindicators give a more long-term impact assessment than just a single grab sample, and that's why we use them. As I mentioned, the high status waters, it is really critically important from a water quality, but also from a biodiversity perspective, that we pay particular attention to our high status waters. They're, as I said, the most diverse, and they're closest to pristine. And Ireland is one of a small number of European countries that has high status waters in such numbers, but they are in decline. And Cormac will go through the Blue Dots Catchments Programme, as well as other initiatives that Ireland is taking to protect these most precious waters. So looking at the threats to aquatic biodiversity and therefore water quality, they are too much nutrients and other chemical pollutants, as well as the lack of a habitat. And you can see from the graphs on the left that less than 53% of our river waters are at good status or better, and that means 47% are unsatisfactory in terms of ecological condition. So there's a lot of work to be done. The graph on the right shows the distribution of pressures on our different water types. And it's not surprising to see that agriculture, which is our greatest land use, is our greatest pressure, affecting 1,000 water bodies. This is followed by hydromorphology, which affects 442 water bodies, which is the impact on our rivers by alteration to the natural flow of the rivers. And this could be through channelization, disconnection from floodplains, barriers, and culverts. And Trish and Ciara will explain more on this in their presentations later. Globally, the Living Planet report, a deep dive into freshwater that was produced in 2020, proposes that an emergency response plan is needed for freshwater biodiversity. And what was interesting when I was looking at the plan is that 5 of the 6 priorities that are included in this emergency recovery plan are also included in the draft River Basin Management Plan. And so it is imperative that we ensure that the appropriate measures are taken now to protect our waters, but also to protect their biodiversity. Within the Local Authority Waters Programme, we have adopted an integrated catchment management approach, and we gather the best available information to understand our catchments. We want to know where our water is coming from, how it flows through the landscape, both overground and underground, and what activities in the catchment may be causing pollution of our waters. We also look at the uses of water, be it drinking water, agricultural, industrial, and recreational, but also at the vital ecosystems that depend on water to survive. We engage with local communities and involve them in decision-making and management of their catchments, and by increasing their awareness, and also through the delivery of projects, many of which have a biodiversity element. We also promote the implementation of the appropriate measures to ensure that activities that present a significant threat are effectively managed. I've already made the link between aquatic biodiversity and water quality, but there are measures that can improve water quality and improve the terrestrial biodiversity. So when looking at measures, we always look to those that can provide multiple benefits. And a managed buffer in riparian margins that are designed to reduce sediment and phosphorus loss can provide benefits through the development of nature corridors along rivers. And removal of invasive species is also good for the riparian margins. So riparian margins are important for wildlife, butterflies, bees, and birds, and as I said, when properly managed, can provide water quality benefits. And it's interesting to note that the Draft River Basin Management Plan has a minimum target of 2,500 square kilometres of riverside interception measures as a target. And in the plan, it also proposes that an estimated 20,000 hectares of organic soil rewetting will deliver on water, climate, and biodiversity benefits. Unfortunately, however, we are seeing through our local catchment assessment work that riparian margins and their vegetation is being lost through land improvement works. So one of the many ways that LawPro engages with communities is through the delivery of the Community Water Development Fund. The fund was introduced in 2018 and has increased in size over that time to a total fund of just over $500,000 this year. And you can see from the graph that the fund has been significantly oversubscribed and that over 200 applications were received this year, seeking grants of over $1 million. And we've awarded just over half of that. And so you can see that there is great interest by communities. This graphic shows the broad range of application types fundings from last year. And this slide here shows the range of deliverables or the projects that have been delivered by communities. And there's a significant biodiversity interest. I don't have time to go through many of the examples, but I will try to give a flavour of the work that LawPro's community water officers do with communities, particularly in the area of biodiversity. But before I leave the Community Water Development Fund, I just want to mention the Blue Dots Catchments Programme again briefly, because an important part of the programme is to raise awareness of our Blue Dot water bodies. And this year we've introduced a new category in the Community Water Development Fund, specifically for projects being carried out in these water bodies. An additional 10,000 was awarded as part of this programme and was shared between two groups this year, IRD Duhallow in County Cork and the Centre for Environmental Living and Training in County Galway. The role of our community water officers is to provide support to community groups by providing project management advice, to work with them on securing funding, to help them establish where they want to, community groups or community catchment associations, and to provide them with technical support. With some help, there are projects that groups can do to improve our in-stream habitat, and we will see great examples of this later on. However, just to be mindful that any significant works in stream should be carried out in consultation with the IFI and the National Parks and Wildlife Rangers. And while these works are largely targeted at protecting and improving water quality, there are wider benefits for biodiversity, climate, natural flood management, education, and social benefits. Our community water officers help community groups turn ideas into reality. And with the help of our community water officer in Dublin, Byrne carried out rainwater harvesting pilots in 2020 and 2021, where they worked with the local community and residents in Stoneybatter to install rainwater planters in 10 local houses to divert stormwater from the surface water and storm drains, and this benefited the water quality in the Liffey, but also increased biodiversity in our urban area. This project has received a lot of attention, and the community group has leveraged private funding to expand this project in 2022. Moving on to the tidy towns, we also work with many tidy town groups, and this was mentioned in the earlier session. And this is an example from Geishel in my home county of Offaly, where the local tidy town installed a rain garden to divert the surface water, to divert and treat the surface water from a car park before it would enter directly into the river. And I see this as a win-win for water quality and biodiversity. And Adrian will speak more on these nature-based solutions that can be put in place. In terms of citizen science, we are actively supporting a national approach to citizen science, and there are 2 community accessible schemes developed by universities and the EPA in partnership with LawPro. The National Biodiversity Data Centre is developing an online repository, and citizen science is also being piloted as part of the Leader in Biodiversity training, which I'll speak to in my next slides. So in terms of building capacity in communities, the EU Leader programme is a significant player in the promotion of rural environmental awareness, protection and enhancement. The programme promotes innovation and community ownership. And LawPro and the Irish Local Development Network has produced a guidance document to integrate water, climate and biodiversity project ideas when communities are applying for Leader funding. And Leader companies have delivered 15 bespoke training courses, with further being planned in the future. And we're also working with different stakeholders on an increased focus on our high status and blue dot waters. The IRD Duhallow was one of the first companies to roll out the Water and Biodiversity training course. The course consisted of seven online modules, a combination of classroom and field, and these were delivered across 9 subcatchments. Each course was tailored to local catchment typology, and the attendees were matched to the local area for training. The course consisted of citizen science, local project development, and the use of available mapping tools. The information given in the training modules combined with the participants' own knowledge and interest, and was used to identify projects they wished to undertake. And water-based biodiversity action plans that we heard of earlier were created through conversation and discussion with participants, with projects then being brought forward for action and funding. 2 catchments groups were developed in 2022 from this process, and IRD Duhallow set up a conservation volunteers group as well. So a lot of action on foot of this training. In relation to invasive species, community groups are active in taking actions at a catchment level across the country. They are supported through the Community Water Development Fund and our community water officers, and examples of species being tackled include Himalayan balsam and giant hogweed. Another important measure to protect our biodiversity is through promotion of biosecurity measure at all of our community events. We also support a coordinated catchment scale response for incidents such as the crayfish plague, and we support the National Biodiversity Centre in their development of pathway action plans for invasive species. Some of LawPro's funding has also been used for collaboration projects. One of such examples is the Loch Ennell Wetlands Study. This was co-funded with the National Parks and Wildlife Service and Westmeath County Council. And we commissioned a consultant to carry out a habitat survey of key areas. And of particular interest was the alkaline fen. The project has made a number of recommendations that may be considered for inclusion in the Natura 2000 management plan for the loch, and a visioning workshop is being held in Loch Ennell next week, whereby having this baseline data measures for the protection of the fen can be considered. LawPro also supports a number of different European Innovation Partnership Schemes, or EIPs, across the country, which are managed by DAFM. We are directly involved in the Deal Spatially Targeted EIP in County Limerick, and we supported the Ballyhura Development Company in applying for €80,000 in funding from the department. The project looks at the effectiveness of spatially targeted biodiversity measures in reducing phosphorus and sediment losses. And you can see here that farmers are interested in taking action to improve water quality and biodiversity, as 90% of them have engaged with this project to date. So really, that's all I have time for today. I hope I've given you a flavour of some of the community actions that have been undertaken. I'd like to thank my colleagues for their contribution and advice, to the event organisers for the invitation, but last but not least, to yourselves for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mags, and thanks particularly for sticking to the time limit. You kept within the constraints very well. I think you've kind of painted the background picture here. I think there's an appreciation now of just how integrally related water quality and biodiversity is. I mean, we're now looking at ecological quality. And also you've kind of linked through to the rest of the presentations. You can see what LawPro's doing. A lot of very diverse activities happening out there at both the large and local scale. So we're going to circle back round and just dip into some of these initiatives that Mags has mentioned during her presentation. The next presentation then we have is from Adrian Conway. Adrian's a chartered engineer. He's worked in a range of areas within the local government sector in Dublin for the last 40 years. He retired in April 2020 from Dublin City Council, where he was an executive engineer or a manager with responsibility for matters relating to Water Framework Directive. However, we didn't leave him rest too long, and we brought him back into public service because I know he has a passion for nature-based solutions in the urban environment, and he's done absolutely tremendous work over the last 12 months for us in developing or scoping out a implementation strategy for nature-based solutions in the urban environment. So, Adrian, could I ask you to give your presentation?
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Colin, for that, and thanks for everyone for attending this afternoon. I was just thinking as I was walking across the city centre this morning that I picked an auspicious day to talk about rainwater management in an urban context, and I hope anyway that might have set the tone for what I'm going to talk about. Also, just to pick up on what Mag mentioned, hopefully over the next few slides, not only will we be talking about nature-based rainwater management, but we'll also be looking at the multiple benefits that she mentioned there about this, we want to achieve, including biodiversity. We don't always recognise the impact of our decisions over the decades to cover our urban areas and impermeable surfaces. The resultant risk of flooding is more often recognised than the impact on the environment. Urban areas collect a wide range of pollutants and toxins from vehicles and other sources, and these are washed into the urban water environment when it rains. Also, where the urban areas are served by combined sewers, the rainwater runoff causes these to overflow into the urban watercourses and pollutes them. Further environmental damage has been caused by culverting urban rivers or enclosing them within concrete channels and walls, as was mentioned a minute ago. All of these impacts are being exacerbated as a result of weather patterns that have changed since the 1960s, a trend that's accelerating, leading to more localised and more intense rainfall events. The approach to urban rainwater has not changed for over 100 years, and we continue to deliver urban plans and projects based on outdated principles. For some time we've realised the flood risk implications and we're learning the environmental damage being caused. The response was the introduction of the concept of sustainable urban drainage, or SUDS, in the early part of this century. While this has been included as policy now for over 20 years across a number of areas, including county and city development plans, the focus has been almost entirely on reducing flows through engineered and often underground solutions. SUDS is being seen as a drainage issue that was dealt with by drainage engineers, and the sustainable element has been largely ignored. Underground attenuation tanks are used widely, and they're not nature-based and do nothing for biodiversity, and they don't really work in the longer term due to lack of inspections and maintenance. In order to address the fact that around 20 years of SUDS policies have failed to deliver real change, we need to place more emphasis on nature-based solutions, sometimes referred to as nature-based SUDS. This has been further developed into the concept of water-sensitive urban design, which reflects the need to manage urban rainwater or surface water on the surface as close as possible to where it falls in accordance with principles of sustainability. The fact that this management is on the surface, though, means that it can only be delivered as part of an integrated urban design. This is probably the most important message of the presentation, and one of the main reasons why implementation can be complex and require a multidisciplinary approach. The role of these nature-based solutions is to store the runoff and delay the flow using specially designed and constructed planted and landscaped areas. This not only reduces the downstream flood risk and storm overflows from combined sewers, but also results in the removal of most of the pollutants from the eventual runoff. This function of retaining rainwater has also led to the use of the term natural water retention measures. I'll return later to the multiple benefits of using this approach, as set out in the graphic. The 2021 National Climate Action Plan states that climate change is here and is already impacting our world, and also states that climate change impacts are already locked in. However, in the plan, the focus is largely on reducing future carbon outputs or climate mitigation, rather than the need for adaptation to the changed climate. Our urban areas in particular need to be adapted as a matter of urgency to make them more resilient to the changing weather patterns. They're more impacted because of the fact that they're all impermeable. Indeed, the IPCC issued a report earlier this year in February that covered adaptation and highlighted the need for adaptation. Our existing urban drainage systems are designed based on historical statistical data that no longer can be relied on due to the weather changes. The resultant drainage systems are just not capable of dealing with the new reality. So we can't replace all the existing infrastructure, so we must adapt quickly by delivering greener, more absorbent urban areas. As mentioned earlier, the fact that we need to change our urban surfaces with increased use of soft landscaped areas means that this approach must form part of our urban land use planning. Therefore, urban spatial planning and urban rainwater management must be integrated. We are promoting the need for a rainwater management plan to be drawn up for each town or urban area in conjunction with as an integral part of the spatial planning process. This can identify how best to deal with rainwater flows, having regard to the topography and characteristics of the urban area, and allow the integration of the required landscaping and nature-based solutions into the spatial planning process. We need to change the approach to all urban planting and landscaping so that it is designed to be part of the urban rainwater management system and thus provide significant added value. This slide sets out the main functions and concepts behind the delivery of real change to a nature-based approach to urban rainwater management. Rather than being seen as another demand on limited urban space, the successful integration of the approach into the urban planning and design process can deliver multiple benefits. We should move away from the concept of a separate SUDS device or SUDS area, because this is not really integration, and we need to move towards an area where all urban spaces have multiple roles and functions. This has been identified as nothing less than a culture change in our approach to urban design, one that requires the support and involvement of a wide range of actors across public and private sectors and across society. I think it's fair to say that we're not lacking in plans and policies in this area. The plans I'm showing here are all interlinked, or probably should be, is maybe more accurate. However, they're usually drawn up in isolation by different government departments or agencies, and the opportunities for a more coordinated and integrated approach can be missed. In an urban context where space is limited and where every plan and project have multiple impacts on the broader urban area, the need for a more integrated planning and design-led approach that can deliver benefits and outcomes across a whole range of plans and policies is obvious. We often hear about a whole of government approach, and indeed you might have earlier, if you're listening to the Taoiseach earlier this morning, he mentioned this as their approach to this particular issue. This is certainly needed to deliver on these many connected plans, but it's also true that a similarly coordinated approach at local authority level is required. The department consulted widely in 2021, and that's what I was working with Colin on. We consulted across all local authorities, as well as national agencies, professional bodies and other stakeholders. The result was a scoping report that set out a roadmap of solutions to deliver implementation, together with an interim guidance document that sets out how to implement nature-based solutions in an urban context based on international best practice. This latter document is online, by the way, if you want to have a look at it. It was recognised at an early stage that delivery of solutions was most likely in the context of existing urban plans or projects, such as urban regeneration or urban transport. All urban designs must comply with the Design Manual for Urban Roads and Streets, or DMURS. Many of you will be familiar with this. We engaged with the relevant departments, and as a result, we've drafted a new advice note for DMURS that focuses on nature-based rainwater management, and it's hoped that this will be formally adopted as part of DMURS shortly. We've also engaged with the offices leading the current urban regeneration programmes, with the NTA's active travel team with Irish Water, responsible for urban combined sewers. The upcoming investments, and there's a lot of money being spent in this area, provide a once-in-a-generation opportunity to deliver these projects in a new way, incorporating a nature and landscape-based approach to urban rainwater management, increasing biodiversity and urban greening and better places. It is important to note that even small urban projects can sometimes provide these opportunities. Given the investments in our urban areas under Plan 2040 and the recognition gained during the recent pandemic of the value of our urban outdoor spaces, we are at a watershed moment. We can't continue to plan, design and deliver monotonous grey urban streets like the Dublin streets shown on the left, and they looked even worse this morning, I would say. Or we can move to a completely new way of imagining and delivering our urban areas. The public sector, through these series of investments, must lead by example and thus encourage private developers and individuals to follow our example. We're often guilty of asking private developers to do things we're not doing ourselves. Community groups can have a major role in demanding and supporting this change, such as groups such as the Tidy Towns committees and other local groups that were mentioned earlier that promote biodiversity and the environment. The changes required can appear to be daunting and require many professional groups and individuals to step well outside their comfort zone. However, they can be delivered. We have spoken to a number of practitioners who have delivered successful projects, including nature-based rainwater management in a large range of cities across the UK, including Cardiff, Glasgow and London. All of these have similar urban landscapes to ourselves and similar weather patterns. The pictures I have here are from Sheffield in the United Kingdom, and I'm sure you will agree that this approach to urban design is one that we should seek to follow rather than continue doing what we're doing. I've included at the top right of the slide a graphic used by Sheffield to show how these landscaped areas effectively manage urban rainwater while also delivering multiple other benefits. I've taken the opportunity to list here a range of those benefits. I'm sure I've missed out on a number of them. However, I hope in the presentation that I have shown that there are many reasons to adopt nature-based rainwater management solutions in urban areas, that these can be delivered where there is cooperation across departments, agencies and disciplines. Also, we currently have a unique set of opportunities given the funding of urban regeneration and urban projects generally to deliver a real step change in this area. These solutions have wide-ranging benefits and tick a lot of boxes across multiple government policy areas. It's largely a matter of considering nature-based solutions at the earliest stages, and even where the works are relatively modest, to look for opportunities. As a colleague has said during the project, don't resurface the space but reimagine it. I look forward to seeing many examples in Ireland in the coming years. So I want to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to a discussion on this later. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adrian. I think everybody's sold on the idea of nature-based solutions in the urban environment, and maybe during the discussions we might return to the challenges you see, and you've touched on them, and indeed the opportunities where we can actually capitalise on schemes, etc., that are there. So thanks again, Adrian. Our next speaker now is Trish Murphy, and we're going all the way up to Donegal, where we're going to look at nature-based solutions in a rural setting. As I said, Trish is with the Inishowen Rivers Trust. She's a project officer. It's an environmental NGO that aims to protect, promote and enhance rivers in the Inishowen area and increase awareness and skills within the local community itself. Trish has a PhD in zoology from UCD and previously worked as an IT consultant, as a science educator in schools and community centres, and has managed the revetment project for the Trust and coordinated the natural flood management in Inishowen, which is one of the first community-based scheme in Ireland. And she's also developed the Trust's highly successful Inishowen River Guardians training programme as well. So Trish, could I ask you to come forward? Thank you. And I might just remind people online, if you have questions, please send them in and we'll pick them up later on.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the introduction there, Colin. I don't need to go into much more detail about myself or indeed the Inishowen Rivers Trust. So just to let you know where Inishowen is, if anybody doesn't know, right up at the very top of Donegal. So the Trust has been operating since 2016, and in that time we've become very keen on nature-based solutions. So it's a very strong focus for us, and because of that we have developed a training programme that Colin alluded to there, the Inishowen River Guardians training programme. So this is where we have developed programmes, brought in facilitators to deliver training that increases our skills and awareness around nature-based solutions, giving us particular skills that we can then use on the ground. So this programme is very action-based, and we will engage agencies, volunteers, contractors, whoever wants to come along to that. And it's been very important for us to deliver some of the nature-based solutions that we have to date. So sorry, the slides are a bit moved about a bit, but anyway. So one of our key nature-based solutions projects has been our natural flood management project, which we ran in 2021. So this project came about as a result of flooding in 2017 in Inishowen, which had a very big impact on the community. And so we developed the idea of bringing this to Inishowen, and we worked with the community. So before we got to 2021, we spent 3 years talking to the community, learning more, doing more training through our River Guardians programme. So we involved a wide range of partners on the project, which is, a lot of people are talking about collaboration in projects. So we did that, and then communication was also a very strong aspect of the project. It's the first community-based natural flood management project in Ireland, and so it's been a good learning curve for us, but keeping that connectivity with the community and communicating to everybody involved has been very important. So, sorry, all the titles have moved about here, but this is Natural Flood Management Clonmany. So this is the area that we worked in. So Clonmany is a little village here near to the bay. So that whole area was very hard hit during the 2017 floods, and so we looked at possibilities in the area for natural flood management, and we identified these 3 areas. So this slide or image on the left shows you the kind where exactly the measures went. So we were putting small measures on some of the tributaries in this area. So what did the measures look like? We mostly installed leaky dams, so of a few different types. So this is log leaky dams, and these are trunks of larch usually, which were installed installed directly into the banks, and they sit above the base flow of the river, so they don't interfere with the normal flow of the river. But when there's a flood, the dams become hydraulically active. So the water will leak through, and they're also designed to, they hold back a little bit of the water, they slow the flow basically, but they're also designed just to overtop so they don't flood out onto the plains. Now I know there's lots of different types of leaky dams, but these are the ones that we installed, and we could install 3 to 5 a day. The installation process involved a digger because of the size of the trunks. And the dams then were placed in series. If you can see that there's a few dams along this trench here. But not all of the dams were put in by a digger and a contractor. We also got volunteers engaged in doing them. So some of the dams will be smaller dams, such as the boarded dams there down on the left-hand corner there. So we had volunteers doing that with us, and we would have trained them up on that technique while we were there. Another part of the project was the ecological assessment of the sites. So before we did anything, of course, we engaged with all of the agencies on this, and we also brought in an ecologist who did a full audit of the areas just to ensure that we had no impact from the dams. So some of the results from that assessment were that the biodiversity was very low, very little vegetation on the rivers, and therefore we had less opportunities for doing natural leaky dams, which are just where you fell them into the river. And we also found that there was a lot of physical modifications to the channels as we went through them. Another project that we worked on a few years ago in 2020 actually was the Glenaganon River Restoration Project. So based on all the work that we had done through our River Guardians programme, so we did things like hydromorphology, bank erosion control and willow spiling, we learned how to do revetments. So we engaged with landowners, and we specifically worked on this particular river where we repaired 5 sections of the riverbank. So we included a lot of different activities in this, like fencing and tree planting as well. All the work was carried out by the local volunteers. So at the time, we were all volunteers. I am now employed by the Trust, but at the time I wasn't, so every person who worked on this was a volunteer. So the diver included there, he came in and did the diving for us just to check under the water there. So we do a lot of brash collection in this, and we get the brash free from foresters who are thinning. We collected Christmas trees, and we engage with the agencies on this as well. So just to give you an idea of what we actually did. So this is just one of the 5 sections of the river that we covered. So this section has a bridge, and we repaired this section here down on the left-hand bank there. So we put a revetment in the first part. We did an intermediate solution in the middle, and a final revetment at the end. So just to show you from the start, this is our fixed point photography on this site. So at the start, this is what it looked like, lots of boulders. The farmer had been putting these in to prevent erosion, which was a big issue along the bank here. We removed those, and then on basically the first day we removed them, and then on the next day we put in the brash revetment. Very important to do the work all in one day, just in case there is a flood and your work gets carried away. And actually there was a flood the first night just after we finished this. There was a flood that evening. So just to let you know how it's doing, so we had anticipated certain things. So we were looking at reinstating hydrological processes. So, and what we had anticipated and what we had hoped for did actually come about for us. So we were looking for more gravel bars to be deposited. We were looking for gravel bars in particular in front of the intermediate solution that we did to protect that, and that's exactly what happened. So our knowledge of hydromorphology really helped us in this regard. So 6 months later, the bank had sedimented up a lot, and a year later, the vegetation has regrown, so we planted a bit of willow in there as well. So also at this site, there was a fish barrier, and I know Ciara is going to talk about this in more detail, but we did this very, very simple solution where we put in tree trunks onto the bridge apron. The bridge apron's 10 metres, and it was posing a significant barrier to the fish going up the river because the average depth over that apron was 5 centimetres. So what we did by putting in the baffles was increase that average depth to 20 centimetres, and even while we were doing the work, the fish were jumping up over the barrier. This is one of the other sections further on down the stream, and this is a really good example to see how much of the sediment has filled in, that's within a 6-month period. So nature very, very rapidly helps the river to recover. And we're very keen on getting the river to do a lot of the work, so we're working with nature on that. So overall, we protected about 185 metres of the bank, and the benefits were in things like trapping sediment. There's a lot of sediment in the river. It helps to reprofile the bank. It prevents further erosion by reducing the energy, and we created gravel bars which facilitated more habitat for the fish and the invertebrates. Another project that we are currently working on is an EIP that we have, which is called the Culdaff Riparian Buffer Zones, or CRIBs for short. So it's this lack of vegetation on our rivers that we were very concerned about, and the fact that if you're looking for flood resilience in your rivers, you have no trees to fall into the river to create habitat, to create diversion, to keep your hydrological processes going. So we need to introduce that. So we are working with farmers in the Culdaff area. And we have a normal tree planting program every year, which has a very good uptake amongst the volunteers and the landowners. But this particular project, we're going to plant 7,000 trees, and the aims are to improve water quality, reduce erosion on the banks, to increase biodiversity and to improve that flood resilience. You can see one of our beehives. We give out beehives to the farmers. So the river corridors, we're enhancing them on a long-term basis by putting in the trees and the vegetation, by keeping the livestock out. But we're also trying to improve those as natural corridors for wildlife by putting in bees and things like that. So finally, another project that we worked on last year was one where we were thinking about the invasive species on our rivers, in particular Japanese knotweed, which is a big problem, and particularly on the Glenagana River that we worked on. So we teamed up with a soil person. He actually just did a soil course. He was one of our volunteers, and the conversation came about while we were on the riverbanks, the fact that we wanted to reduce our use of pesticides. So we started off with a very small trial, which we did with the Donegal County Council. So the site on the left was treated with a mulch and a spray. The one in the middle was just treated with a mulch, and the one on the right was not treated. So you can see the difference. These photographs were taken the same day. So you can see that the mulch that we were created has an impact on the Japanese knotweed. Now, this is a specially formulated microbially active compost. And so the council liked it so much that we went forward for a public service innovation fund, which we were awarded there earlier this year, and we're now scaling up on this project to tackle Japanese knotweed using a nature-based solution. So I suppose in summary, just to say that we strongly believe that nature-based solutions can provide better alternatives and better solutions. They're cheaper to install. They provide habitat and increased biodiversity. They're also very sensitive to the environment and less risky. And they provide those excellent opportunities for collaboration, which is key to going forward. There are challenges, and there are things that we need. We need more training, certainly, and that's for everybody. We do find that sometimes the contractors are largely unaware of their impact when they're doing some work, so we like to train our contractors very carefully on what they're doing for us. Also, we need to be resourced more effectively. NGOs are in a perfect position to provide these kind of demonstration sites or to actually deliver on projects. So if they were more effectively resourced, they could do this. And it should be really seen by the funders as an investment rather than a cost. And as well as that, we believe that there's such an urgent need to prioritise nature, keeping the conversations going, local actors, local NGOs on the ground talking to landowners and farmers all the time. This is what we need to kind of create that urgency for people to understand how important it is that we do this properly. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
Thanks, Trish. I think you really illustrated the largely untapped resource that's in our communities and just what a difference they can make. So again, we come back to the discussion. It'll be interesting to hear more about that in terms of what you feel needs to be put in place to assist communities. Our next speaker is from Inland Fisheries Ireland, Ciara O'Leary, who she's a senior research officer in the research development section. She's responsible for a number of projects dealing with diadromous fish species and hydromorphology, which is the physical health, if you like, of our surface waters, including a national barriers programme, which you'll go into, the eel monitoring programme, Habitats Directive fish monitoring programme, and indeed the environmental river enhancement programme, which I think is done in collaboration with OPW, certainly in the past. Ciara has a PhD in marine biology from UCD, has worked in marine areas, protected areas, since joined what was the Central Fisheries Board, and that's what it was when I was with it many years ago. It's now Inland Fisheries Ireland. So, Ciara, could you come forward and give a short presentation? Thank you.
Thanks very much. You're going to hear a lot today from me about we, and I mean the royal we, but I actually mean Brian, Roisin and Sarah. So to bear in mind when I say we, think of them because they do a lot of the work here. I wanted to start off today talking about the Amber project. So this was an EU-funded Horizon project that IFI were involved in. Jimmy King and James Barry were involved in it. And it really got barriers into the headlines of the newspapers, and it really became a real talking point. And here are some graphics there of what they found. Based on the app that they created and the barrier surveys that were going on, they estimate there's about 1 million barriers in Europe. There's 300 different types, so different names. We talk about dams and reservoirs, culverts, weirs, sluices. They have 300 different names for all of the kind of structures that are in our rivers, just to kind of put it into a scale. They found that many of the technical fishways are ineffective for the weaker swimming species, so this means our lamprey. We have this problem in Ireland. A lot of our fish passes are deemed just for salmon, and salmon jump, and lamprey do not jump. So it's one of the problems that we have to solve over the next couple of years. And then a lot of our barriers, we keep thinking about upstream migration, and we never think about what goes up has to come back down. So a lot of our fish, they're migratory. At some point in their life, they go upstream, but they also have to come downstream, and it's an area that we don't really think too much about. So again, another topic that this Amber project raised and said, look, again, another thing we have to look at. And finally, barriers, they don't just affect fish passage. They affect habitat, they affect sediment flow, they affect the water flowing and temperature. So it's not just one element. When I talk about fish passes, that's just to get you all in the room, and then I can talk about all the other aspects that it has. And then finally, and I think one of the biggest outcomes of the Amber project was that 85% of our structures are actually really small. So everyone thinks about Ardnacrusha or other large dams that we remove, but actually the vast majority are our small culverts, our bridge aprons. You think how many times does a river and a road network cross? There's a structure in there. And are they impacting on fish migration? Sometimes yes, not intentionally and not when they were put in, but water erodes, and sometimes what put in was a naturally free-flowing river is no longer that. So that was just a little overview of Amber. Simultaneously to when this program was going on, we were talking to the Department of Housing, and again, it wasn't me, about how big of a problem is it in Ireland, and we needed to create a database and find out, where are the barriers, start to prioritize them, and then, so that we can start looking at how are we going to mitigate them in the future. So as Mags mentioned earlier, under the WFD status, we are failing on hydromorphology, and barriers to connectivity is one of those elements in there. So we have a big problem, and the National Barriers Programme was developed to understand what is going on, where are these structures, and we did that by creating this national geodatabase. And we got a lot of information from the organisations that I've shown up here, and then we created an app, which basically means that we can go out into the field now. We have our potential points, and we can go out and assess, are they a barrier to fish migration or are they not? And this is one of the latest numbers. This changes on a daily basis, so don't hold me to these numbers. As I said before, we have an application and people are out there monitoring and assessing barriers all the time. And so all those numbers, they go uploaded to the cloud. The database gets upgraded every evening, and these numbers are changing. But what we found was that we have about 73,000 structures that we've highlighted in our rivers. We don't know if these are all barriers to migration, but they are structures and they need to be assessed, and we need to take them off the list. To date, we've assessed about 25,000 of them, and we found that about 6,000 are barriers to migration. The other 19,000 were classified. They're not an issue. They can be. We don't need to look at them again, and we can carry on as normal. But these structures have been in our rivers for decades. Some of them older than that, you know. But why now? Why is all this talk about barriers in the media? Mags mentioned again about the status of a lot of our freshwater, a lot of the problems in our freshwater, but I want to talk about the fish status because I'm selfish, and I'm from the Fisheries Board. So when we look at fish status, we have the European eel, and they're critically endangered. We have pollen endangered, sea lamprey are near threatened, and then we have our salmon, our shad, Arctic char, and sea trout, and these are all classified as vulnerable. This is using the International Union of Conservation of Nature's classification. So this is what they're saying is the problem. European eel is critically endangered, and while you won't see ads on TV asking you to protect these like you will with the tiger and the panda and the elephant, they are still a really important species in our freshwater for biodiversity, for what they bring to the ecosystem, and yet you know, the knowledge of them and of the problem that we have is not quite out there yet. So everyone here knows that there is a biodiversity and climate emergency. I don't think that's any news to anybody here. But one thing I wanted to say, and it's something the Taoiseach mentioned this morning, was this shifting baseline. We didn't wake up this morning and someone clicked their fingers and half our fish populations were gone. This happened so gradually. You know, again, I'm going to talk about the eel again. The recruitment of eel started to crash around 1980. For the first 10, 20 years, we didn't really register that it was in trouble. You know, it was only in 99 when a recovery plan was starting to be, that was the advice from ICES, was 1999. That's nearly 20 years into the decline before we kind of went, oh my God, there's something wrong here, we need to do something about it. But again, we talk about our memory loss. We forget how many fish were in our rivers and how populous they were. Again, with the eel, you know, the recruitment phase, you used to see this black line coming up the river. You know, we don't see that anymore. In 2011, we had a really good year and we were all very excited. It's a really good recruitment year. Yes, it was a very good recruitment year because the year before was so bad. And this is just not as bad as the year before, but it's not good and it's not what it used to be when we go back to what we consider pristine. So again, I just kind of want to put the thoughts in our head that we have to be remembering what we're talking about in terms of scale here. So again, a third of our freshwater fish are at risk of extinction, and our migratory freshwater fish have declined by 76%. And I don't know if you recognized from the species I had listed there, 5 of those 7 are diagamous species. So that's species that migrate up and down our river. So is there a coincidence that they're the ones highly impacted? Let's see. So I wanted to show you this graphic, and it's just to kind of put it in context. Again, we've seen these barriers in our rivers. You know, they've always been there, but what exactly are they doing? Never mind the fact that, as you can see, it's a structure and it's affecting fish passage, but it also affects the habitat. The top picture, you can see just along the bottom, you've got all the cobbles, nice cobbles there. When you go to the dammed river, you can see all this impounded sediment. So all of that cobbles that would be spawning gravels, that's no longer available for the fish to use. It's covered over by silt. If you look at the types of fish, the top picture, we've got a natural river. We've got a lot of diverse fish species, a nice community going on there. You look at the bottom picture, not so diverse, not so many small fish. We talk about flow. So if you can see the white arrows in the top picture, we have flow, but we also have these eddies going on, you know, and that's creating diversity in flow and in speed. And that's really important. So the water is actually cleaning all those cobbles and gravels, and it's keeping that fresh oxygenated water. If we go down to our dammed river, we're not really getting that sense of flow. We're not getting that eddies in the impounded section. So that water now is not really flowing. It's kind of stagnant. You can kind of think of it like a lake. And what happens with the lake, if you see our temperature probes, that's starting to heat up in the summers. So when we compare, we have temperature probes put into these areas above a dam, and we can see that the water is rising, and we have cold water fish, so there's a limit to what they can withstand in terms of temperature. But if you go to a resilient, free-flowing river, the same sunny day doesn't have the same impact on the river channel because it's free-flowing, because the water can just keep it moving. So that's, just a really quick overview of the other impacts besides fish migration that it's having on our rivers. I'm going to go back a sec. So I have a little video here, and what I want you to kind of keep an eye on is by the bank. So once it starts, keep an eye on the bank, and then you'll see. I'm going to stay quiet. So that was taken by Maureen Byrne. It's the Moynalty River in the Boyne catchment. And that was just to kind of put it into perspective. We consider salmon a jumping fish. Again, a lot of our fish passage options are for them to jump, but there's limits to what they can do. And while they can jump, doesn't always mean that they should. To put it into context, these individual fish have left the Boyne catchment. They went to sea. They survived 2-3 years fishing out there up in Greenland, feeding, getting the condition that they need to come all the way back. They come all the way back in the Irish coast, back up to the river after like a marathon journey, and then we expect them to jump hurdles, and then we wonder why the species isn't doing as well as it should be. There's so many pressures on these, and these structures is just one additional thing that we can actually do something about. And if that helps them get to their spawning grounds that bit easier without having to jump, then I think that's a good thing we should be doing. So in terms of restoration, I just wanted to say what we're looking for in terms of restoration is, and people mentioned it here before, we're looking for process, we're looking for connectivity, we're looking for complexity, so that's diversity, and we want ecologically functioning rivers. But we have some hard conversations to be had. Anytime we want to remove a structure, we have to kind of put it into context. These have been here a really long time, and we use them. Some of them are being used, and there's a valid reason to use them. And as you can see, these are just examples of all these conversations that have to be had before we start making these decisions. So again, Colin keeps asking me, when can we get them out? It takes time, and it takes this collaboration with other agencies before we can do anything about them. But conversations are being had and plans are in place to start mitigating these things. So our actions, we need to complete the inventory. As I said, 70,000 structures. We've assessed about 25,000 of them. This is where I do my shout out, and if anyone's in the audience who works with barriers or they see bridge aprons as part of their day job, if you audit them, if you do maintenance on them, we want to talk to you. We have a training program. We can get you trained up on how to identify barriers. It's basically a yes-no question, and we're very keen to get as many people looking at these structures from a passage point of view so that we can start chipping away at that number. We're also working with OPW on mitigating small-scale structures and gravel traps, and that's a report that we had worked with them on. And finally, just research studies. So again, what we want to do is show you the evidence. So when we're having these hard conversations, we have hard evidence there to show you the impact that it's having, not just on migration, but also the habitat impacts. So if anyone wants to do a deeper dive into barriers, my colleague gave a webinar on World Fish Migration Day. It's up on the Inland Fisheries Ireland YouTube page, so you can go have a look at that. It goes into a lot more detail than what I was able to do here today. And yeah, just a thank you.
Thanks, Ciara. That was a really excellent illustration of the impacts that barriers can have, and the numbers are quite stark. Maybe not as stark with the inventory. We had 73,000, and maybe that's something maybe a bit more manageable. But I think that you make a really important point in terms of it's not just a matter of going in with a high mac tomorrow. You've got to consult with the community. You've got to go through planning. There's appropriate assessment where habitat's concerned. It can take a while, and IFI have experience there. So it'd be interesting coming back into discussion in terms of IFI's views in terms of what is needed to now tackle those several thousand barriers. So thanks again for that. Our final presentation is from Cormac McConigley, who's with the New Waters of Life. It's an integrated project, large scale. He has some history here with Hoistada's Waters, having worked on the Blue Dots, which is a LawPro initiative, which Mags had mentioned earlier on. So he's steeped in this area. So Cormac's just going to bring us through some initiatives which are ongoing and which we hope to kind of work together, so we actually start to get to grips with the problem with Hoistada's Waters, which have been declining. Cormac. Thanks.
I brought a stopwatch just because this could go on for any amount of time. Particularly having to follow that fish, which is the second saddest video I've ever watched. Colin has introduced me very well, so I won't labour on it. But I'm going to talk about 3 initiatives that Ireland has initiated for the preservation and restoration of high status water bodies. And this seems to work. In the previous room, I was really regretting having so many clicks because it looked like they were struggling, but in this room, it seems to be on par. But anyway, I'm going to talk about the Blue Dot Catchments Programme, my previous employer, the Waters of Life, my current employer, and the Agri-Environmental Climate Measure Cooperation projects that I don't work for, but I'm just going to introduce them and how each of these initiatives is working towards the preservation and restoration of high status water bodies and where they are. So I'm going to use the term Blue Dots a lot. And you would have heard of the Blue Dot Catchments Programme, so you're probably wondering what are Blue Dots. So Blue Dots are water bodies, rivers, lakes, transitional and coastal water bodies that must achieve high status under the Water Framework Directive. So in these water bodies, good status is not good enough. They have to achieve high. They are our most pristine water bodies. Often I default to talking about rivers, so if I do, but it includes lakes and stuff, but they are our most pristine. And as Mags outlined at the beginning, they also tend to be the most diverse. And so have to be protected. But because they're so pristine and diverse and least impacted, they're the most sensitive to impact. So they're easiest to cause a problem within as well. So just remember that they're very diverse and they're very sensitive. Ireland is a leader in Europe in terms of the numbers that we have. So we have 384 water bodies that are Blue Dots, and 319 of these are rivers, so you tend to be talking about rivers, and they're all outlined in this map that you can see, where they're coloured by their current status. They should all be blue. They're not, but I'll get onto that in a moment. But just know we have 384, and most counties have at least one. Most counties have at least one Blue Dot, although they are concentrated along the western seaboard and the mountainous areas of the Midlands and the East. So you'll see from the map, if you're good at national geography, there's a lot in the Slieve Blooms, so Laois and Offaly, there's a good lot in Wicklow, and then basically all up the west coast. Lots of these water bodies. But I always think it's important to remember the connectivity of a catchment. So you may not live right beside a Blue Dot river, but there might be a lake or a transitional or coastal water body downstream of you, and you can see that over on the east coast in kind of the Meath area, that the coastal water bodies are Blue Dots, and so you've got to remember that everything is moving down through the catchment. Unfortunately, since Water Framework Directive monitoring began, this is just a graph from 2007, that blue bar of water bodies achieving high status has been declining, and this is a trend that we need to first halt and then reverse. So, what we're doing about it? Well, the first thing we did was we established the Blue Dot Catchments Programme in 2018. So the Blue Dot Catchments Programme is controlled by a steering group made up of all these various organisations. I got all their logos, which is a fraught and dangerous task because you undoubtedly have got at least one of the logos out of date. So if one of them is out of date, I apologise. I think the departments are handy because it's just a harp and a name. But if I've got anything wrong, I'm sorry. So an awful lot of organisations, the main stakeholders at a national scale who have input into water, sit on the steering group, and they control the actions of the Blue Dot Catchments Programme. We started in 2018. I think the first meeting was actually January 2019, and it was in Ennis. It's the only time I've ever been to Ennis. And the Local Authority Water Programme, they perform the secretariat, and that's where the Blue Dot scientist and the Blue Dot manager sit within LawPro.
The objective, the overriding objective of this program is to initially integrate into the wider implementation structures that we have. So anyone who's familiar with the regional operational committees and the regional management committees and WPAC, and we have this big structure for water quality with the River Basin Management Plan. So initially the catchments program integrates into that and then focuses the deployment of resources towards high status and maintaining and achieving high status. That makes that a focus, brings it to people's attention, and prioritizes that as much as possible. And they developed a vision for this program that it would collaborate with local communities to protect and improve pristine water so that the benefits to biodiversity, health and well-being, and our heritage, which is important, as well as climate, would be enjoyed by current and future generations. And you'll note the biodiversity is right at the beginning, so it's very in line with the conference, but there's a huge amount of co-benefits if you can restore to high status. So I know everyone's going to be interested in actions, and I have 4 minutes left, 5 minutes, so let's go quickly. Some of the actions of the program is delivering training, specific training around the preservation of high status through the catchment science and management course that some of you might know is ongoing at the moment with the local authorities and others. That the Blue Dot Catchment Program has inserted sections specifically about high status into those, which is really, really good because it raises awareness about these sensitive and valuable waters with people who actually have control over putting in measures in places and making development decisions and making choices about measures. So it's very important that that training is provided, and they provide that. The program also has input into LawPro's work, and I have a map at the end, you'll see this, but many of you will know LawPro's working across 700 and something water bodies at the moment, and 65 of them are blue dots across 45 different prioritised areas for action. So the Blue Dot Catchment Program has inputs into that process, engaging with the communities that live there, informing on the risk profile of those water bodies and identifying what the specific issue impacting it and what measures might work. So the program inputs into that. So it's sort of working through LawPro. And then it tries to engage with communities, recently working with Streamscapes down in Cork to develop a Blue Dot booklet so that the local community know they live in a Blue Dot, particularly if it's achieving its objective, because it's their actions on the ground that have allowed it to maintain high status for a long time. And we want them to know that. And then we're rolling out signage in consultation with local communities. And Mags mentioned at the beginning, there's now a Blue Dot award where Blue Dot communities working in Blue Dot areas can get specific monies. And then, of course, because it's about collaboration, working with Waters of Life and these agri-environmental schemes. Now on to Waters of Life. I've got 2 slides per initiative, so I do need to go reasonably quickly. Waters of Life is a major life integrated project that was launched in April 2022, so very, very recently. Some lovely photographs of the day. It's a €20 million project that's going to be delivered over 7 years. And it will initially, anyway, or primarily operate in these 6 catchments that are sub-catchment scale, if you're familiar with EPA mapping, so about 100 square kilometres each. And 3 of those catchments have been selected because there are agricultural pressures on blue dot water bodies, or on high status objective water bodies. And 2 of them, where forestry is the primary pressure, and 1 that can serve as sort of a control, where the water bodies are maintaining high status for a long time, and we can look at the effectiveness of protection measures. It's worth noting, though, that because these are sub-catchment scale, there's multiple water bodies in each one, and so you will get multiple pressures in any particular area. So this is going to be a massive project to figure out how we're going to preserve these waters. And what the project is going to do is, in one sense, introduce a results-based agricultural payment scheme in the agricultural areas, which will work with the landowners to protect and restore the high status water bodies near their farms. This is similar to what the Permelsel project at Al would have done. And we will develop a framework of measures to address the pressures that are on high status. And these measures should protect and enhance high status objective water bodies, and then we'll be able to feed into the work of the Blue Dot Catchments Program, which is working at a national scale. And this should build on Ireland's capacity within the whole country to develop and design measures that can achieve high status, or can allow for these water bodies to achieve high status. And then, of course, promote community and landowner ownership, because that is going to be key, that the community that live in the area feel a sense of ownership of the measures, so they don't come down from on high, but that you get the community in at the beginning in measure design and measure implementation, and it's a collaborative effort. The Agri-Environmental Climate Measure Cooperation Projects, I'm sure they'll have well, AECM is what they're usually called, but I decided I would avoid acronyms, so I put the whole lot anyway. There's 8 of them in the country now. They're mapped here. I didn't put up their names, but you can see I've also outlined where the blue dot rivers are in blue. So you can see that the overlap between these project areas and the blue dot rivers, so 319 rivers, is really, really significant. I believe that this is almost kicking off now, but I think it launches early next year, but I'm not sure. So these projects are a new approach to environmental schemes. We've heard them mentioned in many presentations this last couple of days, so it's great. But they're taking on the lessons of the effective European innovation partnerships that we've seen in the past, so the EIPs, and we know what these RBAPs have been effective, and so this is going to be rolled out under CAP, so standard are brought into the fold, I suppose. And high status objective rivers, along with, of course, the high nature value habitats that everyone speaks about. But the high status objective rivers were a key selection criteria, and that's why it's not an accident that the overlap is very high. So these are a key objective, is achieving high status in these water bodies. And the Blue Dot Catchment Programme is going to have input, or had input, into the areas that we're selecting. That's how they have collaborated. They provided input into those areas. And then, of course, these projects are going to engage Waters of Life once they're up and running, and the Blue Dot Catchment Programme on the measures that are available. And the measures will, of course, target water quality, because a high status objective is a key selection criteria. It's going to be a key outcome or a measure of success. And one way that this is saw already is that the whole farm scorecards that they're going to use will consider all the bits of the farm that are within river subbasins, so within the subbasins that the project sits in. So that's really, really valuable. And of course, then we'll engage all through with each other through our national steering groups, which is important. And I'll take questions. This is my last slide, but this slide is a long slide, so I apologize. So I thought this was a good headline. Through collaboration, blue dots will be protected and restored. And I wanted to just look at what sort of intersection we're looking at. So here's the 319 blue dot rivers in Ireland. So you could hopefully see the purple blotches there. So those are the catchments that have been selected by the Waters of Life. So there's 13 blue dots and 21 other river water bodies within those subcatchments. That's excellent. Here, if we overlay the cooperation project areas, you'll see that's 240 of the blue dot rivers, along with 67 input and water bodies. 75% of all blue dots, if you want it just nice and easy, are covered by those areas, where again, hopefully, results-based measures will be put in place for the preservation of high status. And then if we bring in the Blue Dot Catchment Programme and its work with LawPro, a further 48 blue dots are pulled in because they're inside LawPro's prioritised areas for action for the next cycle. So at this stage, we only have 29 blue dot rivers that are not covered by one of these 3 programmes, and only 9 of them are at risk, which means, the other 20 are fine. I checked, they're all at high status, it's going to be fine. And they're in Cork, so, So by collaborating, these 3 programmes have covered like 93% of the blue dots. And so long as they can engage effectively, which they will, because I work on one of them, then we have covered everything just by collaborating. So thank you for listening to me. You can get me at this email or check out these websites if you would like to discuss these further. Thank you.
Thanks, Cormac. You managed to encapsulate all 3 initiatives. It was a big ask in 10 minutes, so appreciate your efforts to do that. But I think it's important to try and draw the links, if you like. It is now just coming on 1:15. We did start about 25 minutes late, so I propose we'll continue for the next half an hour, if hopefully that suits most of you. What we'll do is, given we have kind of writing instructions from the organisers, there's certain questions we need to answer, and I'll put questions to the panel here, and then I'll come back to questions that might have come in online. And I don't know, have we had many questions coming in? So you probably have a couple that you might pose. So we'll leave that till a little bit later, and then we'll open it up to the floor for people to make comment or ask questions or look for further elaboration or whatever that might be. So just as an icebreaker, I suppose, given all of the areas that you're working in, if I was to put you in a corner and say, what's the one action that your initiative that you're involved in could take that will make a difference to biodiversity, what would it be? Mags, you've been sitting there the longest.
I think for me, what's a think over the last 2 days, what I've heard is that there's an awful lot happening, but do we know where it's happening, how effective it's happening? So for me, and I've said this before, is to really use the data, gather the data, and make sure that we're gathering it spatially so that all the good work is taken into account and we can evaluate what does work and what doesn't work. So that to me is kind of my mantra at the moment, is get the data and then share it.
That's a really good point, because there's a lot going on, community, Federation of Good Water Schemes. We need to kind of recognise that and look as to how we support that and get the scale, the result at scale. Thanks.
Yeah, and evaluate it. That's the key.
Adrian, any?
Well, I suppose just to pick up on that point, one of the things we discovered is there's an awful lot going on in urban areas as well, not necessarily in the water area, but in terms of, I touched on it in the paper presentation I gave there, there's an awful lot going on in terms of capital investment. And one of the things we found was that all of the different agencies didn't necessarily know what the other agencies were doing. So in a given town, you might have one agency who's called to come in and do an urban regeneration, another guy might be going to do a transport plan, and so they don't know what the programs are. They don't. So one of the things we even just a simple thing, we got them together into a room or a virtual room, kind of say, well, okay, we can work out a database even to know what you're all doing. And one of the things, I suppose, that the benefits of that is obvious, really, that we can use the investments that they're going to be making anyway to actually do it in a different way that increases biodiversity and puts in nature-based rainwater management solutions. As I used to, one of my mantras, we were talking about mantras, one of my mantras used to be, stop doing stupid things, which is kind of like, what we've been doing. We keep just digging, spending loads of money on our cities and towns and finding they're exactly the same as they were before. There might be a few nice things here and there, a bit of Chinese granite or a few planters, but the rainwater management and the biodiversity and the nature-based solutions are not being put in. So that's what we need to be doing most of all. We're spending lots of money, but we're not getting the benefits that we could get for more or less the same investment by putting in the design and thinking earlier.
Thank you. I'll come back to you in a few minutes, just maybe drill a little bit deeper on the sort of factors there as well. Trish, your
okay, hard question, because we want to do everything, but I would say if I had to pick something, I would pick riparian buffers because of the multiple benefits associated with that. So paying farmers to take care of nice wide buffers, and I'm not talking 2 metres, I'm talking 6 preferably. And if you did that right across the country, that would be most of the country covered, because we've got so many waterways and watercourses. So I think, the maintenance, training farmers on how to maintain the rivers properly, and just, we'll see that benefit in terms of the water quality. We'll see it in terms of, recreational value for people, carbon sequestration, and wildlife corridors. They're fantastic wildlife corridors in the same way that hedgerows are. So that would be my one.
Okay. Be back to you later. Ciara, what's your...
I think I'd have to echo a little bit what Max says. I mean, the data is key. Any kind of restoration measure, whether it's what the guys are here are doing in terms of the riprap and the revetments, and what we're doing with the barriers, is outlining from the very start the aim. How are you going to prove that this was successful? And you need to decide at the very start on what are you going to measure it, how are you going to measure success for these things, and then if we can do that, then we can show everyone how successful these methods are. But it's really important from the start. We did a restoration guideline 2 years ago, when we looked into it. A lot of projects, this is in the literature now, they never outlined what the goal was. What are you hoping to achieve? So you can't determine that it was successful if you've not put it down in writing, this is it. So I think that's a really key one now, is to be really smart with how we use our money and go, this is what we're doing and this is how we're going to show that it worked.
Good point. Cormac.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this as they were all making great answers. Yeah, it's hard to say what the most important action is. So I'm going to go. I think the most important thing that we have to achieve, and Waters of Life will take important steps towards achieving this, is that we need to work out and appropriately price services that we want from land, other than food production. Of course, we all know how much beef costs, so that's fine. But we need to figure out how much it's going to cost and decide to do it in like a hearts and minds system. Like any program or any project that lasts 7, 8, 10, even 15 years, great. you can have 15 years of improvement, and then as the program ends, your project ends, your money's gone, you move on to the next job, and everyone reverts back. It might take years for them to revert back to the previous behaviour, and any benefits that we're seeing are gone. So we need like a wholesale change in like people's minds and their beliefs and attitudes towards how valuable like a 6 metre buffer is, or how valuable like beef from low density areas is. So I think that's it, but I don't know if I'm going to achieve that. But yeah, at least that would be long term. You know, if you could just click your fingers tomorrow and change everyone's opinion, then I would, but I can't.
You've 7 years ahead of you.
I have 7 years to get this done. Yeah.
Really good points. I might just come back to Adrian on the point you were making about people doing stupid things, you know, and not maybe focused on where they need to focus. Could you maybe, again reflecting on the scoping you've been doing and kind of the assessment, what's your view in terms of why are we not implementing this approach effectively?
Well, I suppose all the speakers here have identified a lot of complexities in this area, and I suppose trying to distill it down to, you know, its key point. One of the things in the urban area, I suspect this is probably true of other areas as well, is the fact that we tend to operate very much in silos. You know, we tend to operate at different departments in government, and we also tend to operate in local authorities in different sections, like the planners and the engineers and the architects and all that. And one of the reasons we don't really deliver the kind of benefits of nature-based solutions is that you need all these people working together. You need everyone kind of, so, you know, whereas previously so-called SODs was seen as some of the drainage guidelines sometime later on, if you really want to change the way the urban spaces look, you have to have the landscape architects, you have to have the designers, the planners. It has to be built in, right, and it has to be actually on the surface, and it changes the way the place looks, as I showed in the slides there. You know, so you can't do it by just saying it's a water issue. It's not a water issue. It's the whole of city issue. And one of the things that the Taoiseach mentioned earlier was the whole of government approach. And actually, you know, it does kind of slightly set my teeth on edge when people talk about that, because we don't have a whole of government approach. We've never had a whole of government approach. And in the area that we're talking about here, you have your department, you have the Environment and Climate Change Department, you have the Transport Department. I know we've worked quite well with a number of them over the last 12 months. You know, it is a struggle sometimes to get everyone to pull together, you know, and that's the big issue, is to get, you know, everyone working towards the same aim, you know.
Okay, because you're getting these pockets of
yeah,
good news stories.
Yeah, it's always somebody else's. It's that's not my job, it's somebody else's job. And water particularly tends to get siloed into a drainage or a kind of engineering thing. Yeah. You know, it's not seen as something that affects other people. You know.
Okay. And you mentioned opportunities, and you mentioned URDF and said those schemes.
Yeah, there are. I mean, there's so much money being spent. I mean, I think the other speaker mentioned as well. You know, what I'm saying about not doing stupid things is don't spend a lot of money and not get the added value that you can do by simply doing it slightly differently. And these changes are often not massive. Yeah. But you can see, like, everyone wants to green the city. But you see people greening the city, for instance, but putting it up on curbs so the water can't get into it, you know. So that's what I mean by doing stupid things. Like, it's a simple, just think about the bloody thing you're doing, and then it'll be better. So sometimes we just don't do that, you know. Yeah.
Trish, just moving on to the rural environment, and the great success there. I mean, do you see the community, Rivers Trust, that sort of sector having an advantage over agencies and state bodies in terms of doing this work?
Yes.
Okay. What are those advantages? What do you see?
The advantage is, first of all, we're normally living in the area that we're dealing with, so we have a good, deep understanding of the rivers in the area, of just the general environment, and we also know many of the local communities, people there. You know a lot of the landowners, and you have the time to have those conversations. So what happens when the agencies come in, they're nipping in and out because they're busy people, and we just get this job done. We have time to stand at the farm gate and chat to them about things, and that's quite often when a lot of the really valuable conversations come up. Like, we're putting in nature-based solutions, but a lot of the learnings from that and the way it works are things conversations that happen in the pub, that people go home and talk about, and a lot of our work comes from referral. So we deal with a farmer, we run a project successfully with them, that word spreads to another farmer. And so that conversation, spreads, augments through the community, and we get somebody else that we can work with. So it's growing it that way. The agencies don't have that opportunity. There's also a little bit of distrust going on with the agencies. They're seen as enforcement, whereas we're not enforcement, and so we can work with people for solutions rather than.
And can the likes of your trust work effectively with those? Because I presume in your day-to-day work you're engaging with local authorities and fisheries and God knows. I mean,
yeah.
I presume you've developed a good relationship there. How would you see that relationship being developed further?
Yeah, we have developed great relationships. We check everything with the agencies before we do anything, and I think that's very important. The transparency from our perspective is very important, that they know exactly what we're doing, that there is no agendas here, that we're just doing this for a particular goal, as Ciara says, identifying our goals, and so that has worked very well. I think those local community groups have those good relationships, and if they don't have them, they can build them up. I mean, one of the things that we did when we initially started was we went about trying to understand the water landscape, who are the actors involved, who are the agencies that have a responsibility for this, and we ran an event to bring all of those people together, which worked out very well. So we had 25 different groups in a room, all had a responsibility or remit towards waters, and so they each got an opportunity to talk about what they did, and it really, really helped us to understand. And so then, following on from that, every project we did, we knew exactly who to speak to, and so then we can communicate that to the community, because the community would ring us and say, I need to talk to somebody about a particular issue, and we'll tell them exactly who to go to straight away. So there's, so I think, Rivers Trusts and other catchment groups are very, very well placed to sort of make that link, that connection between grassroots and agency level.
Is there something like 8 Rivers Trusts in the country? It's small.
There's 20, including the North
20,
now.
wow,
So
okay.
yeah, I think it's 15.
Okay.
Well, there's a couple of them are cross border, so there's 15 that have a Republic remit.
Okay. And how can the state bodies, if you like, support communities because at the end of the day, POC is a great success, but it's scaling it up so it's something meaningful. How can the state support communities in
Well, funding is a key thing. We, at the moment, the Inishowen Rivers Trust and the Meg Rivers Trust in Limerick have some funding through the Pilot Resilience Programme, which is funded by the Department of Housing. So, but it's not enough, and that's one of the really good learnings from the project. We're 2 years done. It hasn't been enough. It's a sliding scale in resources. So the first year, full funding. The second year, 2/3. The third year, 1/3. And the point being that we were to be resilient and we were to find our own funding, but it's a very difficult task, particularly when the funding out there doesn't give staff costs mostly, or things like insurance or accountancy bills. They're all things that we need to pay for, and it's quite high. And so it's been very difficult. So you spend a lot of your time searching for funding that'll keep you in your position so that you can continue to do what you do, which is searching for funding. So, I would much prefer to be out on the rivers, but, if I get out 3 days a week, I'm lucky, but I have so much admin to do. But so I think definitely, further resources, but also little things like further training, which I'm noting that you're providing further training. That's been a real winner for us, that we now understand much better what's needed and what to do and how to be effective in what we do. So,
thanks, Trish. Ciara, just moving on to the barriers work, and clearly the groundwork has been done there. There's a fairly good picture of what lies ahead, albeit it's going to take quite a period of time to do it. What's needed now to actually deliver on that, the mitigation that's required?
Well, I suppose one of the driving forces, and something I didn't mention, was the biodiversity strategies, 25,000 kilometres of free-flowing river. So that's what the EU have come out and said that's our target by 2030, and it's about 950 kilometres for Ireland. So that's a pretty big task. They came out last before Christmas, they came out and said what we actually mean when we talk about free-flowing rivers. It's longitudinal bar, so that's the barrier issue, but they also want us to start looking at the lateral connectivity as well. And, you know, so we were delighted when this biodiversity strategy came out. It's like, we really need this. But when you talk about lateral connection, you're like, oh, they just made it so much harder. Because, again, it comes back to that conversations that we have to have. So what we need is a dedicated team. And you know, we talked about resources. There needs to be people who this is their full-time job, is barrier mitigation. It's going out to the community. It's creating, you know, in order to mitigate a structure, you have to go out to tender, you have to get an options report. So you have to hire a company to come and give you the options. They have to model it, they have to find out what are the impacts. You need architectural surveys, heritage surveys, biological surveys. You know, there's so much involved in each and every one of them. And so it's having the funding and having the funding locked in long term, because some of them will be very easy to mitigate. And the small structures, they're going to be, you know, we can do them, we've done them in the past, you know, we can get them mitigated quite easily. The larger structures are going to be a bit more difficult, they're going to have a longer time frame. But we have like a three-pronged approach, and then we get to be opportunistic, you know. We deal with the OPW and they're doing schemes, they want to incorporate barrier mitigation into their other work that they're doing, and again, that's where we get the cost benefit. So with all these three different strands, with the resources in place, we'll be able to move it along.
Cormac, just moving on to the high status waters, you've mentioned three really important initiatives there.
Yeah.
As well as the challenge in my mind is how you get those working together seamlessly to deliver. There's big money being spent here, and we need to make sure that the money's being spent in the right place. What do you see as the challenges to if you like, three entities working and making sure that they're working well together?
There's a lot of challenges, and I suppose the cooperation projects really are going to turn into 8 separate entities. There's 8 separate projects, going to be 8 separate teams, assuming somebody doesn't win more than one, which might happen, so maybe it's going to be 5 teams. And there's loads of other programs going on as well. But the 3 that I spoke about, they sort of work at different scales to a degree. Like the cooperation projects are specifically dealing with agriculture, so of course they're pressure specific, and it's agricultural funding, so they work at that pressure in those areas. That's great, and I think they will engage very closely with water supply. I think they will engage very closely. It's hard to know, obviously, but they'll be doing similar stuff as water supply will be doing in its agricultural catchments. You know, similar ideas. So I think that is going to be a very close relationship that will be important. And then Waters of Life carries on for X years. You know, it's until 2029 or so. And that Waters of Life sits on the steering group with the Blue Dot Catchment Programme, essentially. And the Blue Dot Catchment Programme is going to feed into everything. And all being well, funding permitting, the Blue Dot Catchment Programme will carry on in perpetuity, you would hope. Unless we fix everything, which might happen. But it should carry on in perpetuity. So really that will be the vehicle for facilitating collaboration, I think. Like Waters of Life will have a very important role with the cooperation projects, but the Blue Dot Catchment Programme covers the whole country. It covers every blue dot, every pressure and pressure owner, and it should carry on beyond the end of the next RBMP, or River Basin Management Plan.
So potentially a real game changer.
Yeah, it was like someone was talking yesterday about I can't remember her name, but about the corporate memory of MPWS and how it gets decimated every time they're teleported into a new department. And I think the Blue Dot Catchment Programme will become the corporate memory for high status in Ireland over time. You know, like everything that we learn in Waters of Life will be fed up into that when then it carry on into 2040, 2050, etc.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Thanks for that. They're the questions I had. I just want to open to the floor now for any questions that people had, and then in a minute I might ask Anne if there's a couple of questions that people online wanted to put to the group. So, anybody want to here, and then here? Did I miss any hands? I counted 3 hands up. Yeah. Okay. If you could maybe just say where you're from.
Hi, my name is Ruth Keever. I'm the water coordinator for the Green Skills Programme. Thank you very much for the interesting session. It was really great. I have 2 questions, and I suppose the first one is for Ciara and Trish. And I was just wondering, do you have any usable resources, awareness-raising resources that could be used by schools or community groups runs a water ambassador program in secondary schools, and students and teachers are heavily involved in that. And I know that for a fact that they would be interested in even knowing about what you're doing and what they could do. I know it seems like a very big scale, very difficult with the barriers, how to alleviate that, but they'd be very interested in it. And on another note for Ciara, it's the app that you mentioned. Is that available to the general public, or is that just for your use? Because I know as a citizen science tool, the water groups that I'm involved in would be really interested in using that in their local rivers.
Can I answer the second part first? Because that's the first thing in my head. The app that we're using is not it's not for general public because it's licensed. It's an ESRI license, so we need to work with people who will have access to it. But I suppose what we're interested in is if people, there is an Amber app, and that is for general download. That was created under the first project, so that's available for everyone. And it's still live and it's still valid. People can go in and do it. Our app is licensed, I'm afraid, but it is something we can discuss. Again, there might be ways around it, is what I'm saying, if there was enough interest for it.
I'll take the schools and community groups one. So we do some work with the schools. In a past life, that's what I used to do. I used to go into schools to teach science. And so I enjoy doing that, and it's we try to incorporate little bits of that into our projects as well. So, for instance, we're running a catchment restoration plan in an area. We'll go into the local school to talk to them, or we ran a summer camp, for instance, last year. So we do that in terms of the resources that we give to them. Those projects have resources. They have the finance for us to produce something, but as outside of that, we don't have enough resources to do that. But we do produce a lot of literature which we give out to people all the time and to community groups. And we would also use apps as well. So we would try to encourage citizen science. So we have a few online forms really that people can fill in for like invasive species. But also if we do a measure, then we can ask the farmers. We'll give them a sheet to say fill in if you notice anything or whatever. But we'll also put that online for them to make it easier for them. So we do try to make it as easy as possible and try to gather as much data as possible.
Thanks, Trish.
Could I just jump in? Sorry.
Yeah.
We have an education officer in IFI, Lorraine O'Donnell. So if you are interested and you want to get in touch, she would have resources. We would have videos that would be available. And also just to mention, we're involved in the Catchment Care project, and the Catchment Care has done videos specifically for schools, and I think they're on the YouTube channel. I think there was one of them that might have had a barrier element to it, and there's also restoration work in there, so there might be, if you want to check that out.
Okay, thanks. We have a question here. This gentleman, the beard.
Hello, my name is Paul Fitters. I work for Chagas. I'm an educator in the Botanic Gardens. I have a question for Trish. I've been asked to give some advice on Japanese knotweed control, and the mulch is new to me, and I'm very curious. Well, also I would say I like the leaf dams, easy and very personal. But can you tell me a bit more about the mulch? Can I talk to you separately to get information on it?
Yeah, sure. Just briefly, so I'll tell you. Basically, it's about creating a compost that has a certain ratio of bacteria to fungi in it. So what you notice if you have any kind of experience of Japanese knotweed, so I'm just talking about Japanese knotweed here, that it doesn't grow in forests, and so if it comes up to a forest, it'll stop there. So, and that can be possibly due to a couple of things, but I think it's mostly related to the composition of the soil. So the soil is more mature, it's got a higher successional, it's at a higher successional stage. So what you're doing is you're creating that soil, and when you mulch that around the Japanese knotweed, it doesn't thrive in those conditions, it doesn't like that. Now there are some caveats with that you do need to plant over it, because otherwise the fungi, the ratio changes again and will deteriorate again. So you need to feed that. So what we do is we put on a mulch, and we also take a tea extract from the mulch and spray it on. So that sort of double approach seems to be quite effective. So there has been some work done in the UK on spraying with the fungicide, which showed better success than the actual insect introductions, you know, the pest species. And so we were looking at that as well and thinking about that. So we've devised this kind of program which we're hoping to scale up now and try and mechanise it, because we were making the compost by hand. We're trying to mechanise that so we can make more compost and apply it then to infrastructure projects, which is why the county council are very interested in this, because it would save them a huge amount of money if we could do this, you know, quickly, cheaply, for a long-term basis, rather than spraying year on year on year. This is, and it's more sensitive to the environment. So anything we can do to reduce the amount of pesticides in the area. But I can talk to you again about it.
Great. I mean, there's really a need for something like that.
Yeah.
We've another question. Yeah, sorry.
Carol, I'm one clearly IP down in Conway. I have a question for Adrian and also for Trish. Adrian, you mentioned your nature-based solutions improve water quality. I want to know what metric you use to definitively say that. And from Trish, I wish it was non-VIP, but just to let you know, I'm buffer zone uptake by farmers. We have 28 on-farm actions that we administered to 65 farmers that completed over 300 measures last year. And our uptake, we had within the buffers between riparian and in feed margins, 7% of an uptake for measures. And we were only insisting on 3 metres. The uptake for measures of buffer zones is going to be very tricky. Now we live the Mulcair's Basin, highly in terms of dairy area. We just couldn't get farmers to uptake the buffer zones, so just to let you know you could face now. I'm sure Donegal is slightly different from the Golden Vale and Limerick, but you could have got those.
Okay, thanks. Could I just ask for short responses on that, because we're up against it for time. Do you want to just quickly respond, Adrian?
Yeah, okay. So I suppose the first thing I should confess is I'm not a scientist, so I'm not an academic colleague here, but basically it's the metrics are, I suppose the way I would look at it is how does the pollutants get into the water in the first place. The rainwater coming out of the sky generally is relatively clean, so it picks up the pollutants off the surface, and the simple mechanism of filtering the water through these designed landscapes means that those particular, so it's not like it's not dissolved, it's within, they're suspended solids, they tend to be easy to filter out. So you're basically undoing what the urban environment is doing, and the metrics usually are that, you know, over experience over internationally has been that the water coming out of those when it filters down through it tends to be much higher quality than before, just by a simple mechanical filtering. So that's how the pollutants get activated in the first place. You're just reversing that. Now it's not a perfect solution. In a very extreme flood event, you can get it being bypassed. But most of the damage is from the first flush, particularly after a long dry spell, and that's what they're really affected at.
Okay, thanks, Adrian.
So just in terms of water quality for our project, we are doing a sweep on water chemistry for all of our farmers. Now the problem with that is that it's just a snapshot, so we would much prefer to have a fixed instrumentation in the river, so, you know, monitoring it long term, but we can't afford that. So our project's only, you know, a year long anyway. And in terms of the amount of farmers that we have, our target was only 10. But it is difficult to persuade them to do it, and even sometimes you might say, we'll fence that, but they don't want to give you the 3 metres. But then you can be lucky and you come across a farmer who's got a hare's corner, a corner of the field that they're not really using, that's not very productive. So we can cut that off, and so you can get some 6 metre buffers. We have managed to do that. So.
Okay. One question here, yeah.
Yeah, hi. Me first. My name, I'm an independent geologist. I just have a question, Adrian, with respect to, you know, your actions with departments and how there might be whether you're taking on board actions, guidelines, or policies in the pipeline for, you know, green roofs and more vertical green mold planting. Is any thoughts on that and things coming on the rise?
Yeah, well, I mentioned we introduced an interim, what we call an interim guidance document, and that does look at green roofs. I suppose the actual focus of our attention really was on the public realm, because that was where I suppose the public money gets spent. But we did look at green roofs, and I'm aware that a number of local authorities have got specific guidance in green roofs, including, as you was mentioning, a talk in the other room this morning at Dunleary and Dublin City Council and others. I think the vertical walls, the green walls, I can't say we have included anything on that in terms of rainwater management. They're probably less effective than the horizontal surfaces where the rainwater falls effectively. Now, they have a lot of function, biodiversity and stuff like that. But green roofs certainly are, I think, part of the solution. I think one of the issues around them, though, as to whether or not they have been traditionally designed in a very kind of a monocultural sedum type situation, which doesn't do a whole heap for biodiversity. And so people are looking at that as to how they can be done better. And it's also true to say that certain roofs are more, amenable. Certain buildings are more amenable to green roofs than others. But I think that's an area that's been slowly growing, but a lot of local authorities are driving that forward now by looking for a certain percentage of green roofs in their area, and I think that's probably the way to go.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. We'll take 2 online questions. I think you had a question, and we'll leave it at that. I think that pretty much covered.
Keegan asked, do we have any coastal water still in Dallas?
Oh yeah, absolutely. 17. I think it's on lawaters.ie. Go to the Blue Dot program. There's a breakdown of how many, but I think it's 3, 19, 74, 11, 17. If you go rivers, lakes, transitional, coastal. Don't quote me, but
and they're very big.
The coastal water bodies are huge, obviously. Coastal.
Okay, thanks.
And there's one other here. This is from Claire Lyons. Does the results-based agricultural payment scheme replace the single farm payment? And she was also wondering that there's a lot of talk about the detrimental impact on biodiversity of the single farm payment because of farmers having to keep their land in good agricultural and environmental condition. And she wants to know if that's being changed. So 2 parts. Does the results-based agricultural payment scheme replace the single farm payment? And is there a change on the good agricultural and environmental condition requirement?
Those are all for me as well.
No, they're from
Oh, thank God. Okay, well, I'm not actually entirely au fait with all the breakdowns of the payments, how the farmers get it, but I think they still get
it's additional.
It's additional. They still get a basic payment,
measure.
and then they get extra if a ring scores well.
There's an issue about double payment for the same sort of thing. So.
Yeah, and it's a great system. If you look into it, it's amazing. Scorecards, it really incentivizes improvement. It's really, really good.
I saw an advertisement this morning. It's been called the new reps.
The new reps.
The new reps. Okay. So everybody's kind of holding on to that old acronym.
Yeah.
I think it was the Farmers Journal were advertising. I think we're expecting open calls next week. Is my understanding.
Do you want to comment a bit about Gaia, good agricultural and environmental condition?
In terms of
just that farmers were losing their single farm payment in the past, and if that's going to change in the new strategic plan.
right. I wouldn't know enough about it to give it.
I can make some comment. It's a little bit of a comment on that.
Yeah.
So there were issues, and it came up a lot for LawPro as well, where farmers would be, and came up in some of the talks yesterday, could be penalised in terms of their payments based on stuff like non-productive, terrible term, land, for example, and those are being changed in the new cap. I think they can have up to 30%. So up to 30% of the land holding of a herd number now can be what we would call like semi-natural or non-productive, and they still get basic payments on that. So they're not being forced to strip land.
I don't think that's finalised as yet, but that's certainly the proposal. It's in negotiations, I think, with the European Commission. Sorry, yourself.
I'll be very quick, we're starving. 2 comments is all it is, so it doesn't need an answer. I suppose anything to do with the aquatic environment. Sorry, I'm Colin O'Flynn, the Invasive Species Officer at the National Biodiversity Data Centre. And all it is the thinking to things in the last National Biodiversity Action Plan is the need to incorporate biosecurity planning and biosecurity policies into all state agencies, into anything that we do, all the way down to communities and individual actions.
Okay.
Check, clean, dry, desiccation kills, and if we can't kill these things, then through desiccation we need to be looking at disinfecting and, where possible, invasive freshwater.ie, go to that website for more information. The only other comment on Japanese knotweed, I'm very interested in this technique. Just to say, there are a lot of techniques out there that control the overground growth of Japanese knotweed. The thing is, very few kill it. So if you're developing a site, if there's going to be any disturbance of the site, you really need to remove it all, which is very expensive, or you are looking at systemic herbicides. So what I'd be interested to see is that long-term issue of management and control to find out what your goal is. Is it to control the overgrown growth so it's not impacting on the environment or whatever it is, or is it to actually eradicate what I won't keep any longer? Thank you.
Okay, before I release you for your lunch and the curled up sandwiches that are left over, do you have a very quick question or point to make? Yeah.
Hi, yeah, very quick. I'm Keegan, I do volunteering in North Wicklow and South Dublin on the waters, on the rivers and streams. If anyone is interested in the cake sampling and the invertebrates that we probably talked about earlier, the winning project in the Intel Mini Scientist, so this is the science competition for primary schools, national schools. The winning project was a Gael skull, an Irish-speaking school in Greystones that did a project on the Fahichi Snahamika, and that is showing on Saturday in UCD, in the science building in University College Dublin. They're showing lots of science stuff, including that. So the children took all my charts that I do with the small streams indexed over the CSSI, and they chopped them up and they rearranged them and they made a better way, and they compared different streams. And they're very happy to talk to any families, any parents, any volunteers, any other up and coming next generation water keepers about what they did and why everyone should take care of their waters and their streams. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So, on your behalf, just like to thank the speakers. I think it was a really engaged, varied discussion, and thanks for staying on and your patience, and hopefully there's some food left for lunch. So, thanks again. Take care. Bye now.